Hi, everyone. This is Jason Briac of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. He's a former Wall Street analyst. He was a top analyst of energy and commodities. And he's back of libertyblitzkrieg.com, and it's Michael Krieger. So thank you for joining us, Michael.
Hey, Jason. It's always a pleasure to be on with you. Thanks.
Yeah, I really enjoy your insights, Mike, considering that we have similar backgrounds and you cover a lot of different topics than me now that you've transitioned out of your former Wall Street career. So let's talk about Bitcoin, Mike, since you cover that a lot. We've had in the last couple months, I don't know how accurate some of these stories the mainstream media has painted. You've had the guy that was on the Bitcoin Foundation. He was charged with money laundering. But from what I've read of the details of the story, he just sold his Bitcoins into the marketplace, and he had no idea where they were going, and the regulators are saying he should have. And then that was one of the main stories that hurt Bitcoin, and then the other one is Mount Gox. So I don't think Bitcoin's going to die, but the mainstream media seems hell-bent on trying to put it to death.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of things there. So let's try to take them point by point. First of all, you mentioned Charlie Shrem, who is a guy I've met, who is one of the most impressive. I met Charlie at the Inside Bitcoins conference in New York last summer, and by the way, they're having another one in April, early April, which I will be attending. So I think you and your listeners should also consider going if you're anywhere near the New York area, because it was a great event, which is why I'm partnering up with them again. But I met Charlie, and he was one of the most impressive speakers and individuals, even though I talked to him for such a brief period of time, I've ever met. His mind was clearly brilliant. Visionary, smart, just a great guy. And so, I always had a very, very strong opinion of him. And then when the charges came out, I looked through them a little bit more in detail. And yeah, I mean, it was, I think, $1 million, Jason, that they're accusing him of money laundering. $1 million. I joked around. I was like, HSBC interns launder that money while they go to the bathroom, I mean, it's a joke, it's a total joke. Like, I know, I mean, HSBC was caught and found guilty of laundering billions for Mexican drug cartels, and nothing happened.
Wells Fargo, too. Yeah. It's not just HSBC. Yeah. There's a long list of them.
Absolutely. It's part of the banking model. So, I mean, and we're talking billions, and we're talking drug cartels, right? People that, horrible organizations that murder people in very vicious ways. Charlie Shrem did $1 million, and all it really did was it allowed somebody to buy drugs on the Silk Road for their own use, most likely. So it's just, even if you could find a law he violated, to be charging him with felonies, they're just, someone's trying to make an example. And it's really sad that the authorities will play God with people's lives like this, particularly people that are creating businesses and growing the one part of the economy, the Bitcoin economy, that's actually dynamic and interesting and revolutionary. So it's really tragic in that sense. And it reminded me a lot of the Aaron Swartz case, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. This guy was, a child prodigy, probably would have, already changed the world in his brief time here on Earth, and was charged with felonies and ended up committing suicide because he felt like he had no way out. They put him in one of these positions where, they basically make you admit guilt, or you have to go to trial and you're facing decades in jail. So they put you in this corner. And that's why I think it's something like 99% conviction rate for federal court. It's insane. It's like worse than Stalin or Hitler, because
yeah, he was a political target, right? Because for our listeners who are not familiar with that case, all he did was he just copied and pasted, some journals, and he ended up getting permission, It was from a nonprofit,
It was called JSTOR, and it was academic journals. You're right about that. He did not have permission to download them and put them anywhere, but you're right in the sense that after he did do it and he admitted to it, the JSTOR, the organization that he hacked, they said, okay, well, we're not interested in charges. Just give the information back and it's okay. So it wasn't even the company or the nonprofit that he supposedly harmed had no interest in charging him. It was a federal prosecutor in Massachusetts, I believe,
who wanted another notch on her belt.
Exactly. It was just, again, playing God with people's lives. And she ended up leading indirectly or directly in some sense to this kid's death. And Aaron Schwartz had stopped the SOPA PIPA bills almost single-handedly. The internet censorship bills. He started Demand Progress, Reddit, the RSS feed. The kid was out of his mind smart. So yeah, I mean, this is what's going on. The smartest people, in this economy are being targeted. And the banks and the criminal syndicate that does actual harm is allowed to proceed with a slap on the wrist. So it's tragic. But anyway, that's my take on the Shrem case. I don't know whether he actually broke some law or not. I mean, it's been shown that everyone breaks laws every day because the legal system is so insane. But they target who they want to target, right? And that's what they're doing in his case, in my opinion. And okay, so I don't think that's. Well, I do agree with you that that's bad media headlines. Like for people that aren't following this closely, they see something like that and they say, "Oh, it's it's dirty, it's bad, Bitcoin's bad." That's definitely part of what's going on. But the Mount Gox thing is a little bit different, and the Mount Gox thing is definitely has been a negative. There's no question about that. There's so much money has been seemingly lost. It looks like it will be lost. I think we're talking like almost $400 million of people's accounts at Mount Gox. And while Mount Gox was not the force in Bitcoin that it was, let's say, a year ago when it was doing something like 90% of the volume, it was down to, I think, around 30% of global Bitcoin volumes recently. So people had been migrating away from it. It still was a big exchange, and some people associated Mount Gox still with Bitcoin. And for me, it's the amount of money lost. There are going to be certain people that were involved in Bitcoin or passionate about Bitcoin who lost a bunch of money and will not be passionate or returning to Bitcoin. There is a percent. On the flip side, and I've written about this a lot, Jason. Bitcoin has clearly survived this, right? I mean, Gox is filed, hundreds of millions are gone, and the price of Bitcoin right now is $665 on Bitstamp, which is the major exchange now for the Western world. So basically, although there's been a lot of volatility, the price impact has been essentially zero. And the reason I think that's the case is you're going to see much more sophisticated infrastructure now being built around exchanging Bitcoins for fiat and vice versa. And that's a very good thing. And so Gox was an outlier in a strange way. It was the management team was clownish, as Andreas Antonopoulos has liked to point out, very sloppy. They didn't know what they were doing. They were way in over their heads. People that were in Bitcoin, including myself, knew this. And so they needed to go. And unfortunately, their departure coincides with a huge loss of money. But in the end, this was not a flaw in Bitcoin. People now realize that. You can see that with the price of Bitcoin. It wouldn't be at 675 if there was a flaw in the protocol. This was a flaw in Gox. And unfortunately, a lot of people got taken for a ride. So it's the free market at work, though, Jason, right? I mean, this was the Lehman moment for Bitcoin. And guess what happened?
Yeah.
We dealt with it. No doubt.
And the industry, I think, will survive, and I think there's still more people switching to Bitcoin. There's been other businesses that still transition to Bitcoin. I haven't seen any major businesses announce that they're stopping accepting Bitcoin. But yeah, exactly. You say that there's a free market here, and that is what's exactly going on. Gox was the first Bitcoin exchange, right? But just because you're the first mover, as Doug Casey says, if you're the pioneer, sometimes you get shot full of arrows. But, this was a case where the management team, I've read some articles on this, like either they were committing a Ponzi scheme with a fractional reserve bank and there was a bank run, or I've read stories where there's people saying that he just forgot the keys and he put the Bitcoins in cold storage. But that one just doesn't seem plausible, but I've read articles saying that. So I don't think that's the case. It's looking to me like the Bitcoins might have been gone, as far back as 2 years ago. But I have a lot of friends who've bought Bitcoin, and they've been telling me for over a year to not buy any coins on Mt. Gox. So it's not like people didn't see this coming.
Exactly. No, you're right. And I've used Mt. Gox, and I've been recommending to everybody that's asked me about Bitcoin in the last, let's say, 6 months to use Coinbase. Because I've had bad experiences at Gox personally. And yeah, I mean, it was never a well-run company, period. No one could ever say it was. It was just where the liquidity was. It was easy to trade once you had money there. So people kept funds there. It was a lot of the volume for a while, and that's it. But look, you yourself just said, right? I mean, you knew people were telling you not to use Gox. So it was known. It was known. It's like you say, it's a free market. I'm not trying to be unsympathetic to people that lost money. It could have definitely easily been me. But at the same time, this is how things are supposed to work. And as Mark Andreessen Brian Armstrong pointed out recently, who's the co-founder of Coinbase, he said, look, it's like email. The Bitcoin protocol is like email. Email is a protocol. Just because certain email providers that use the email protocol go down, that doesn't mean the email protocol goes down. It's just that provider goes down. Now, of course, when there's money involved like this, it becomes much more emotional, and people like to say crazy things and exaggerate. But as you can see, Bitcoin hasn't gone anywhere, and it's not going to go anywhere. And as you say, look, from what I can tell, the smart money and the venture capital, they're going to view this as a huge opportunity. They're not going to shy away. They're going to say, well, oh, wow, well, this is where Mount Gox failed. This is what they did wrong. Here's what I can do better. And so that's what I'm seeing. And some of the smartest people I know in my life that have had no interest in Bitcoin have actually come to me in the last week or so and said, hey, Mike, look, I'm actually thinking about getting involved now. Where should I buy? And that was a real surprise to me, because I actually thought it'd be the opposite, but at least in the near term. But what I can say without question is that smart people are slowly but surely realizing the power of Bitcoin and what it means. And that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of technological advancements on Bitcoin, so this is not like a boring new product that's almost very similar to a lot of other products out there. This is not like eGold or Liberty Reserve or something like that. This is a truly decentralized exchange. Although, governments are obviously probably going to figure out more ways to go after people like Charlie Shrem and things like that at one way or another, because, they don't want people leaving the fiat currency system. But, I really like the technological advancement that Bitcoin is making. But, yeah, Mount Gox, I think, is going to slow down some of the more mainstream people fully accepting Bitcoin, because they're going to be apprehensive. But for people who really understand what's going on, over the next, 6 months or something like that, there's going to be a speculative buying opportunity to probably buy Bitcoin at a reasonable valuation compared to, a 1,200 handle.
Yeah, and look, Jason, I mean, you said it, right? Mainstream people, I agree with you. Mainstream people will be on the sidelines. There will be a certain percentage of the population that's just going to be like, well, yeah, see, I knew something was wrong, or and steer away. But who cares, right? The mainstream always follows the crowd, always follows the herd. They don't do anything. They don't create anything. They go
off the cliff. They're the last people into the trend.
They're not visionary. Yeah. They're not important right now. What's important to Bitcoin is the smartest people in tech continuing to support it and build around it. And as long as that happens, Bitcoin is going to not only be stronger, but be one of the most powerful forces for change in the payment systems in world history. So I'm not concerned. I'd be concerned if smart people were running away at this point, but they're not. And the masses are the masses. They're not going to change anything anyway. Just give them their TV and their food, and their fines and
their bread and circuits. Yeah.
Right. They're not,
yeah, their Oscars and their sports and things like this. Yeah, and their reality shows.
They're not changing the world, so they're not important to me at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of a free market, and I'm in favor of competing currencies more than a gold standard. So let gold and silver and Bitcoin, let them all compete and let the market decide. Maybe the market would vote that Bitcoin would be used for all online transactions, and then people save then in gold and silver. So we don't know what the market would decide, because the politicians and the central bankers, the people who really run the world, haven't allowed a free market and these things to transpire.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. I mean, there are certain things that you can. No one's saying. Look, some people might be saying this, but most people are not saying Bitcoin is a store of value. Gold and silver, those are stores of value. We're talking about two different things, and what I've been very frustrated with, as I've voiced several times on different podcasts about some gold bugs, is it's almost like a dogmatic religious kind of fanaticism that they have against Bitcoin. It's like gold is money and nothing else, or gold is like, I mean, it's like, do they have like idols of gold coins in their homes that they burn candles to? It's a little creepy. And look, I'm as big as I don't have anywhere near a percentage of assets in Bitcoin that I do in precious metals, and nor would I think that'd be responsible. But I mean, you know, it's one thing to say, yeah, gold and silver is a great place to hold your money for a store of value over time. 100% agree. It's another to just talk about gold and silver every single minute of your life rather than doing something else that's productive. And Bitcoin allows you to build and create and innovate. You're not going to do that with gold. So just like, I don't understand the rationale behind buying gold and silver and then just talking about it for the rest of your life 24/7. That seems kind of ridiculous to me. And some people do that.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, the gold community, unfortunately, you know, they keep saying that everything's going to crash, that the world's going to end, that we're going to end up in caves, you know, bartering, and, you know, we're going to have a massive amount of weapons, and it's going to be Armageddon and all these other things. But unless, like, the world leaders are probably going to destroy all of these currencies, and then they're probably just going to reissue new currencies unless we wake up enough people to object to this. But, you know, technology is just going to keep on advancing because technology is not really using debt. I don't really see a lot of Bitcoin businesses, Michael. You follow this more than I do in terms of the Bitcoin businesses. I don't see them borrowing and taking on debt, maxing out credit cards, or taking out subprime loans. Or loans from loan sharks or payday loans and building Bitcoin businesses. These guys are getting cash, you know, savings, or, you know, from venture capital and other stuff where people had their savings and they're building businesses that way.
Correct.
So Bitcoin is being built with savings, you know, how a normal sector would be built. It's not being built, you know, with subprime loans and all these other things.
Well, right. And look, you make the point, which is the point that I've been trying to make as well, that Bitcoin should be celebrated at the least as an actual dynamic, genuine, real part of the economy, right? It's not borrowing. Like I put up a post earlier today, which is now kind of going viral, about how auto loans just hit a record, right? It's a record amount that people are borrowing to buy cars, right? And as so many people have pointed out, particularly in the Austrian school, this isn't creating anything of lasting value. You're borrowing, you're taking on debt to consume. It's not creating value. Bitcoin and the Bitcoin economy is creating value. It's creating it's like the definition of investment and value in technology. It's exactly what's going on, and that's exactly a reason to support it. You know, and so, yeah. Oh, and the other thing though, Jason, I just want to hit on, sorry to interrupt, is that when you mentioned, you know, the world crashing and like going in caves. Yeah, I mean, the disturbing thing is, sure, that's always on the table. I mean, we've seen horrible world wars. We've seen horrible things in the past. Sure, it could happen again. My problem is some of these gold people, it seems like they want that to happen. Like they're almost rooting for it to happen. And that's where I have to say I am in another camp. You know, if we can avoid that at all, I want to. So I certainly, you know, you get into a problem where if you buy too many guns and you buy too many bunkers and you buy too many canned goods, you're waiting for it and you want it. And that's not a good thing. And I'm sorry, I never want to be in that mental place to want that scenario. And furthermore, to your point, which I agree with, which is that they're just going to continue issuing these currencies until they're ultimately not worth much. The fact that we have Bitcoin actually takes off that Mad Max scenario in some way. Because if you didn't have Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies that we could transition to, then it would make the Mad Max scenario more likely, right? Because what would people do? Now that you have Bitcoin, whether or not it ends up doing this, it is an outlet, right? It's like water flows, right? Money would just flow gradually or quickly and stampede into things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin. And then if it does flow into Bitcoin, well, guess what? By that point, there's going to be enough infrastructure around to the point where we could actually transition everything to Bitcoin. So would governments even need to issue new currency if we just all transition to cryptocurrencies, which could happen? It's something to think about.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next topic, I'll just add my 2 cents here that there's the people that are bringing up that governments, you know, want a cashless society, that there's people alleging that the CIA created Bitcoin and things like that. But, I mean, you have J.P. Morgan running commercials about, you know, no cash and that you can do everything from your debit card, online banking, and stuff like that. But I don't really see that as exact same thing as Bitcoin, but there's people who do, and I think that's like from the gold bug community there who doesn't trust, anything paper or things like that. Now let's move on to the next topic here before we discuss Bitcoin for the whole podcast. Let's talk about loss of liberties, but let's talk about Edward Snowden, because the last time I talked, I don't know if I got to ask you about Edward Snowden, but do you think he's a hero or do you think he's a traitor?
Well, I think you know the answer to that, but I'll say it. I mean, I think not only do I think he's one of the most incredible patriots in American history, and he will be seen as such by history, and he already is being seen as such by the majority of Americans. He's one of the most important figures. He will probably be one of the most important figures historically of our generation. And that's a big deal. What he did for so many of us, that have been out there in the wilderness, me, you, and so many others, saying that the government's doing all these things, that the spy agencies are doing all these things, and looking somewhat like crazy people to a lot of our friends. What Snowden did for us is priceless in that he proved we were right. He's told all these things that before you couldn't prove, he proved. And so what that does is it creates a tremendous amount of ammunition for our side to move forward and continue to convince people and to continue to build products that will ultimately free us. So yes, we're losing. Lots of people are losing lots of freedoms globally. In the U.S., they're being eroded. The Constitution and Bill of Rights have been eroded gradually for many, many years, if not decades now. But here's where I have the silver lining and the positive view going forward. And I'm going to relate it back to Bitcoin, of course, but there's a reason. So when Bitcoin, the white paper from Satoshi first came out in November 2008. Pretty interesting, right? That's a long time ago in the financial crisis, let's say, terms. And it was launched in early 2009. The reason I bring this up is because Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that was, or the group of people, saw the problems in the monetary system and had something ready to go at the height of the financial crisis. So think about that. The fruit that is Bitcoin that we're reaping now, the tool that we're able to use, was created all the way back then as a response to a crony system. And it's only now that we're starting to actually use it and advance it. So what I think we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years is incredible flourishing of security products and encryption and decentralization and all of these things in all aspects of life that are being worked on right now by people you've never heard of behind the scenes. What Snowden's legacy will actually be, in my opinion, that it will wake up and shake out so many people to create products to deal with the problems we face that we can't even imagine what they will be yet. But we will see them in the next 5 to 10 years, and it will change the world, and it will change the world for the better. So that's where I see Snowden's legacy. Actually, we won't really see the fruits of it for a few years. But people are working on it right now.
Yeah, he obviously released a lot of documents, kind of like, Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers, if you've learned and read about him. But American society was more moral, and people were, not in debt back then when the Vietnam War was occurring, the Gulf of Tonkin and that incident, because that was a false flag, and Daniel Ellsberg's Pentagon Papers proved that, right? So it just is amazing, though, that Edward Snowden has created a polarizing effect. But people are starting to ask questions now, especially some of my mainstream friends, that I've never heard them ask questions before. And these are people that don't know anything about gold or silver, Bitcoin. So, they're saying, well, Bitcoin is backed by nothing. But then other people are chiming in. I saw this on Facebook play out, and another friend who knows something about gold or silver was like, well, neither is the dollar. So that it's an uncomfortable mental position, but then it gets people asking questions and looking things up. Well, all I hear on the mainstream media is that Bitcoin's backed by nothing, and why would I buy it? But then the dollar is unbacked too. So it's leading to uncomfortable questions for people. But you're starting to see all these news stories. You have stuff in Poland where people's pension funds were confiscated. In Venezuela, people can't even get toilet paper brought to them because their government is doing absolutely crazy and ridiculous stuff. I believe Venezuela Bitcoin's really popular there too. Argentina is just a disaster, and they keep hyperinflating their currency, and Bitcoin's really popular there too. So it's just amazing that, despite all this government oppression, misinformation, propaganda, and force, that the free market is still figuring out, solutions to problems with information, education, and new technologies.
Yeah, no, I mean, very well said. I completely agree with that. And the other thing that I want to point out, there's so many dynamics at play here that it can get confusing from a macro standpoint. And this is one that I don't write about that much anymore, but it's extremely important, is that one of the reasons, right, one of the primary reasons I believe that Americans are sort of so lethargic, and also there seems to be this element in the population that is extremely supportive of the status quo. I believe a lot of that is generational. So let me explain. The baby boomer generation, obviously still the most significant generation alive today. They also have all the assets. We know that the youth isn't doing well. Most of them are living in their parents' basement. So this group of, let's say, 60 to 80-year-old people have the assets and fully and totally believe in the American story. Okay, they are so susceptible to the propaganda as a generation that they keep defending it, and they're defending it for a lot of reasons. One, because they basically had it so easy their entire lives for the most part. I mean, they were born right after World War II, and then it's been pretty good, right, for them. And then number two, they're older and they're getting old, and so do they want to rock the boat? Do they want to imagine significant paradigm shift, or do they want one? No. I mean,
they already rocked the boat when they were younger, right? They don't want to do it again.
No, and they don't want the boat rocked on them as they're about to retire. So they're very powerful still, and they're very complacent, and they are very, very staunch defenders of the status quo. But they're not going to be around forever. And what's going to happen is the younger generations will have almost no loyalty to the system. And not only will they have no loyalty, they'll actually hate it. And they'll hate it because they'll one day realize that they've been whenever we have the next crisis, which of course we will, they will realize that they're saddled with $1 trillion in student debt. They have no opportunities. They've been lied to. Maybe someone's going to try to ship them off to World War III. I mean, who knows? But the generation of young people will have their moment. And when that moment comes, or when the choice is there for them to either defend the status quo or go to something different, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever, they will pick something different in droves. And that will change the world, and that will change American society. And fortunately, I believe that the tools will exist for them to change the world in a very, very positive way. And Bitcoin is just one example of that, but there will be many, and it will be in all facets of life. So that's just an important point I want to make, and part of where my optimism ultimately comes from.
Yeah, and in terms of the baby boomers that you brought up, another thing that's important is that the government has been giving out, so many checks to different people, whether it's Social Security or welfare and EBT or all these other program checks and there's so many government employees now in the bureaucracy and stuff like that, especially because I live right outside of D.C., that, almost everyone here is dependent upon the government. And real estate prices are going up because government jobs are viewed as stable and things like this. But if the government wasn't giving out, more and more money, then there's no way people would want the status quo to continue. So I definitely don't see a scenario. I think it's going to get worse, unfortunately, before it gets better, where government's going to keep giving out more and more money. They're going to, try to redistribute the wealth, tax the productive, and move it on to the people who are already getting the money just to keep them to buy their votes. So I think this is going to get worse before it gets better. But people are waking up, but, there's not enough people quite yet to where we're ready to change the system. But I'm really optimistic about my generation because, we're getting taxed like crazy with Obamacare, and, we have humongous student loan debt. And then, you work your butt off in college, and even then, you're lucky if you can get a $30,000 or $40,000 a year entry-level job, and that's barely enough for rent and food and to pay your student loan bills. And then you don't have any money for savings, and then you're living off a credit card, and it's not really a fun existence.
No, yeah, no, look, I agree. And I mean, the thing though that I will say is the tools are as important as people waking up. And sure, I mean, still the majority of people are completely, brain dead about most issues. And a lot of that, although, has to do with just the fact they don't have time to even read or explore or think, which is sad. But there are enough people that are aware, and I think the smartest people are aware, and they're doing a lot to try to fix it. So again, the tool, as long as we have the tools to do different things and the technologies, and also we always have Snowden, right? Remember that. Like these documents, we always have them. We'll always have this information, and it can always be used. Like let's say there's another crisis in 2 years, and it's crazy, and it's like '08 or worse. We can, people are going to be ready to wake up again at that point. And we have all this info.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mike,
Sure.
but Snowden is also, and this is maybe unexpected, Snowden's also inspiring, other people to come forward, because you've had, Bradley Manning and Julian Assange before that, but now you have the guy who leaked Snowden, the journalist Greenwald. He's starting his own website looking for whistleblowers. So, in the past 10 years or so, whistleblowers were heavily punished. So Harry Markopolos, when he was ready to whistleblow on Madoff, none of the people at the SEC were able to do anything about it. So people are just going to take this stuff to the internet now and publish there.
No, exactly.
So people are going to skip, the government, some of these corrupt or lazy or inept government regulators who should have been doing their jobs, right? And instead, people are going to take these stories to the internet or to the own media on their own, and they're going to wake people up that way. Whereas in the recent near past, those things would have gotten buried. So we're starting to see, more whistleblowers and more people who provide value in the media, like yourself, who worked on Wall Street and had to deal with, some of these ridiculous things, come forward and share their stories with people.
Yeah, and let's not underestimate the fact that Snowden has been so well received in the United States. Now, of course, despite all the BS and propaganda and mainstream media smearing that's gone on in a lot of ways about Snowden, about everything, he's quite popular. And I think ever since the beginning, the majority of Americans has seen him as a patriot and a whistleblower and not as a traitor. And that's huge. I mean, again, look, with all the Disneyland and bread and circus and nonsense that we're flooded with 24/7, the fact that people were able to see through it and see him for what he really was, for the most part, is a great thing. And to your point, it will only encourage people to speak out more, because they see, well, look, the public's with us. The public doesn't like this, the majority. And so, as you say, in the past, whistleblowers have been able to the status quo has been able to marginalize and intimidate and make ineffective whistleblowers in the past. But Snowden was so effective that it will encourage whistleblowers. It was like he's like almost like a next gen whistleblower, right? Like whistleblower 2.0. Right? He did it he learned from the mistakes of others before him to do it more effectively. And I think he'll start that trend, and it will continue. That's good.
Now, before we finish the interview, Michael, what are your thoughts on the U.S. economy here? You covered this a lot. Do you think we're seeing any improvement? Because we do have this cheap oil, and we do have some gains in technology and robotics and things like that. So they are bringing some jobs back. They are bringing pockets of jobs. But I just see, so many college people entering the workforce. Corporations are downsizing because of Obamacare. I don't think it's nearly enough, and it's not a recovery like the mainstream media says. What's your opinion on this?
Sorry. Excuse me. Apologize. So, okay. So I guess the thought of the U.S. economy makes me sick. So, I agree. Look, we don't want to be too black and white about it. I do think the economy is bad. I think it's the bigger point is it's structurally a disaster. And I don't think most people would disagree with that. It's structurally a disaster, and we continue to face this choice of either we're going to write down a ton of debt or we're going to inflate the crap out of it. And we're still issuing a lot of debt, and as I mentioned earlier, with auto loans hitting record highs, we know the student loan numbers. The borrowing to consume structural model of the United States has not been changed. And yeah, I mean, that's structural. It's systemic, and it will come back to haunt us in a major way. So I guess I would say that structurally the U.S. economy is a complete disaster. From a cyclical standpoint, we're now, I believe, entering sort of the last phases. And I don't know how long these innings will last of this new credit bubble. And what really made me think that is that the subprime. If you see that banks are starting to look into getting back into subprime home loans, that's the sort of behavior you start to see at the end. Also, the stock market, the sentiment, the just complete like clownish bullishness you're seeing out there. Another sign. Again, that's not trying to call a top here right now, but it's saying that we're definitely seem to be in the latter stages of this latest cyclical credit bubble. But on the positive side, there are pockets of the economy that are strong. And you can point to things like, as you say, technology and, Bitcoin to me being the most encouraging and dynamic part of the entire U.S. global economy is Bitcoin and what we can do with payments. And the cool thing about that is we're in like inning 1 or 2 of that in what will be a very, very long process of innovation and growth. So I don't know if Bitcoin will really take off and change the world after the next crisis, during the next crisis. Now it's tough to say, but there are things that have been built and are being built that are actually very productive and will be very beneficial to the future. But no, I mean, the structural problems in the U.S. economy are only getting worse, and they will have to be dealt with, and they will be dealt with some significant chaos, and that is coming. But what I've been trying to do is focus my energy and efforts on the parts of the economy that I believe in, that I think are game changing and good for humanity. And that's what I'm focused on. And and fortunately those things do exist. But no, we're in for some serious chaos at some point here, because structurally things are worse than ever.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential. The black swan phrase is used a lot, but there's a lot of those. You have China, which is in an enormous credit bubble. They have a shadow banking system, which is absolutely large. Japan is a total disaster. They've been doing QE for longer than even the U.S. has. And Japan, all they need is a 2% rise in interest rates in Japan, and 100% of their tax revenues will be taken up just for interest payments on their debt. So, and then you have, the problems in Europe, which basically the Fed has backdoor bailout through currency swaps. The Fed has been keeping the QE programs since QE2. Those have been backdoor bailouts to keep European banks and European governments from collapsing. And then you have, the developing markets, which have just gotten enormous amounts of inflation through the currency wars, and they can't handle the amount of inflation, in India, Brazil, Russia, those types of places. They've just had enormous amounts of inflation that they've imported from the developed countries through the currency wars. So, I don't think the status quo can continue for that much longer. It's tough to say exactly when, but as long as people own physical metal, gold and silver, and then maybe a little Bitcoin as a speculative position, or maybe they're going to start a Bitcoin business. Maybe there's an entrepreneur out there listening to this podcast who has a brilliant idea to maybe make a Bitcoin insurance company or a new Bitcoin vault, with better encryption so that Bitcoins aren't stolen or lost like at Gox or things like that. So I am reasonably optimistic about the future because, inflation or deflation, I've looked at in the financial history. During the Great Depression in 1929, there was still humongous technological innovation. There was radios and cars, and Walt Disney was doing amazing things with movies. So there is historical proof that in inflations and deflations of the past, there was still amazing technological innovations.
Exactly, Jason. I just finished with, look, the two things. One is to reiterate your point, which is that just because the global economy, it's not just the U.S. economy, the global economy is structurally flawed, right? I mean, it's a structural house of cards. It will break down. Just because we know that, don't let that stop you from living your life. Don't let that stop you from creating, from building, from innovating. And you can do that now. And like I say, I mean, I point to Bitcoin because that is, to me, the most dynamic part of the economy. Something with that cryptocurrencies, decentralization, peer-to-peer, encryption in general, keeping data private against the NSA, anything like that. Go for it, right? I mean, do that. Please do that because we need that. And don't let the recognition that the global economy is structurally a train wreck stop you from actually going out there, being an entrepreneur, being a technologist, changing the world for the better in the ways you can. So that's my big message. And then the second one is, as you say, exactly, even in the midst of really tough times, good things can happen. And what I think we need to avoid at all costs in the globe is violence. That's the biggest risk. That would be the biggest tragedy, because all of these things, even the global economy structurally having to be reorganized, however that needs to be done. And again, I think cryptocurrency can play a big role in that, and metals too, whatever, decentralization. Violence is not the answer. War is not the answer. It's not going to ever do anyone any good. And that's the thing. If we can avoid that, we're gonna be, as a species, in a lot better shape in 10 to 15 years. So I hope we.
Very, very well put, Michael. Now, as we wrap things up, Michael, please tell our listeners more about your work, your website, and where else they can follow you online.
Yeah, thanks. So, Wall Street for 10 years, left, started writing, continue to write, actually, really, mostly on financial topics. Now I write on anything macro that's interesting to me. Bitcoin has taken up a lot of my time recently, but I write about everything in the global economy that's changing or interesting, or trying to expose corruption, whether it's from intelligence agencies or whether it's corporate corruption or whether it's government corruption. Anything in corruption I try to expose. My website is libertyblitzkrieg.com. It's Liberty, BLITZKRIEG. You can get emails are free subscription, so sign up, get the emails, and spread the word. I'm also very active on Twitter. I think, as you know, Jason, it's at Liberty Blitz. I tweet a lot, very active there. So follow me if you're interested. That's it.
And thank you again for your time, Michael, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
All right, thanks, Jason.